Okay, so video two here is going to just elaborate a little bit more on what it means to think sociologically. And so last video had a definition, a general definition of what sociology is. Here we're just going to expand a little bit more on how sociology kind of looks at things a little bit differently than we normally do just as citizens and people, but also how other disciplines different from how other disciplines look at things. So now, without a sociological lens or perspective or vision, we tend to rely just on our intuition and our common sense gained from personal experience to help us understand how our daily lives and other people's behavior and what they mean and that sort of thing. And so common sense is just really simply that stuff, those ideas that exist out there that everybody knows to be true. A definition of common sense would be something like it's common sense is sound practical judgment that is independent of specialized knowledge or training. Where common sense is a bit too particular or narrow, sociologists attempt to see the general in the particular. So they're concerned with how and why certain, categories of people think and act in certain ways. And so sociology is what's going to help us answer that question. And what I'm going to do, I'll refer you here just as a elaboration on that point again to your online textbook, and specifically the section there that is titled Studying Patterns. I really like Little's discussion here of social patterns and his description of it. So social patterns, Little defines as the biographical details of an individual and the personal decisions that they make. That these things don't exist in a vacuum. This part right here, they don't exist in a vacuum. Social patterns and social forces put pressure on people to select one choice over another. They help us to, sociologists, therefore, then help us to identify these general patterns by examining the behavior of large groups of people. Little goes on to say, when general patterns persist through time, they become habitual or routinized at micro levels of interaction. That's when we call them, those patterns, social scripts. And just like a script, like an actor has, these social patterns then become, they guide us in really clear ways on how to behave. Um, and when these general social patterns, Little says, become institutionalized at macro or global levels, so they become embedded in rules or laws, then we call them social structures. And similarly, just like a script kind of guides you and sort of determines how you should be acting, structures, there's a structure created for, your behavior and other people's behavior. And a social structure is just, I like Little's definition here is good. Social structures are repeated patterns of behavior and coordination that persist through time here. So when we expand our perspective to look for patterns, rather than relying on individual explanations or relying unquestioningly on common sense beliefs, we begin to foster what is called a sociological imagination. And as I introduced last video, sociological imagination concept comes from my favorite sociologist, C. Wright Mills. The sociological imagination is essentially the idea that we think ourselves away from the familiar routines of our daily lives in order to look at them in a different light. So, for instance, Mills suggested that we typically don't, as people, we don't define any of the troubles that we might experience. So, troubles like poverty or ill health or poor working conditions. We typically don't describe those in terms of social forces or social factors. We don't describe them, we don't understand them, we don't define them as social in that way typically. We're more likely instead to attribute poverty, for example, to individual characteristics. So, for example, if an individual was poor, they might be, the explanation might be, well, they're just lazy, they're not working hard enough, or they're not a good worker, and that's why they can't get a good job that pays a lot. We assume, further, we assume that people are generally able to take care of themselves and thus are responsible for their own well-being. And therefore, out of a sense of personal individual responsibility, people generally will work hard. And if they don't, then they deserve, their lot in life. So that's a very personal, very individual way of understanding a condition, a personal or a trouble like poverty. Sociologists, on the other hand, though, don't see personal troubles in quite the same way. Rather, sociologists they tend to think of the personal as political. So the personal is political or the personal is social. That is, that the social forces can and do affect the actions and the experiences of individuals, and that our personal experiences are not just determined by our own individual wants or desires, abilities, or capabilities, but our own personal experiences are facilitated and sometimes constrained or restricted by that social structure we talked about last slide there. So if we go back to the example of poverty and a person who's poor, while that person does make choices and acts in certain ways, say in terms of getting and doing a particular job or whether they work at all, with a sociological imagination, the focus also gets shifted away from the exclusive focus on that one individual and the decisions and the actions that they take, and we look instead at the impact of also the contributing impact of things like the economy. If the economy is really bad and unemployment is really high, more than just that one individual might have a hard time finding a good job. Or you shift the focus away from the focus on the one individual, and look at things like the impact of politics and government support for things like training programs. If it's a government that believes, for example, that people are responsible for themselves and just work hard and that's it, they're probably not going to be putting any funding or support or resources to education or training or retraining programs to allow people to get some of the skills to get those better jobs there. Lastly, again, with this example of sociological imagination and the poor individual, you can sometimes shift your focus to look at the impact of more social things like gender or race, and how that impacts on the choices and the behavior of any one individual. And we know we still have, even though everyone's supposed to be equal and there's supposed to be no discrimination, we do know that people, by virtue of the color of their skin or their gender, face discrimination, overt or subtle discrimination, that limits sort of their experiences in the workplace and therefore their ability to get good jobs and therefore avoid poverty. So the individual in this sort of sociological imagination, the individual is not completely ignored, however. Social life ultimately, though, is an interplay between the individual, their agency, their decisions, their choices, and what they can do, and their free will that they have, but the intersection between that individual and some of the limiting, but also sometimes liberating forces of the social structure. So C. Wright Mills again defines sociology as this intersection of the study of and the understanding of the individual, or he called it the biography, the intersection of individuals' biography, the history, the time period, and the society in which a person is living. So the goal, therefore, of a sociological imagination is to locate that individual within, to locate that individual within both time and space, and to provide a social and historical understanding of the context in which any one individual is acting and behaving and constructing their own identity. So I'm going to sort of capture this, I'm going to give you another, give you a visual way to maybe, understand this particular concept here. And, oh, I forgot, I wanted to switch to this slide here. I just want to remind us of this definition of a social structure. And that is this set of guidelines and expectations that have become sort of really embedded into a society, and it's what gives structure or gives shapes to our own individual lives. So what I want to do here is I want to really sort of illustrate this, I guess it's both of these things here, the sociological imagination and what it is, what it looks like to consider the intersection of biography, or the individual, history, time, and society here. So I'm going to try and attempt to do a little bit of drawing here. So please bear me, well, not drawing, but so we have an individual here on the screen. And let's play with maybe a little bit more specific example, and we'll take a young person, let's say a 17-year-old male that's living here in Alberta right now. And I'm going to use the example of youth employment, and in as our example here. So we have an individual, that's pictured here, and this individual, has a specific, biography, and that biography is, again, what makes them an individual. They, so this includes their age, their gender, their race. It includes their own innate, sort of capabilities and skills and personality and that sort of thing. And all of that sort of, means, and what's reflected here in these arrows is that they're going to just act and behave and live their life and make, free choices and do certain things. So in our particular example here, we have this young male that wants to get a part-time job, to earn some money, is let's say they're a people person, but they also kind of like food. They're sort of considering maybe going into get a culinary degree and learn how to be a cook or a chef. And so, yeah, they want to get a part-time job at, say a local restaurant there. And so they have free will and human agency and to try and want to do that here. Likewise, so that's the biography kind of component. The history component to this sociological imagination is the fact that we'll consider this person is right now here, 2026, here in the time period. And so those are the two kind of components. What this sort of, well, we'll throw in the last component, and that's the intersection between the individual or the biography, history, and society, which is reflected and defined by the particular social structure of the society in which our individual lives within. So again, the social structure here, we can get a little bit more specific here. this person, our young man here, is a teenager here in Alberta, let's say even central Alberta. So the social structure that this individual is living within uh, is marked by, what it means to be an Albertan or Canadian within this particular social structure. And what makes up the social structure, which is what sort of guides and shapes our behavior, are a whole bunch of different things. But generally, they're things like rules, or we call them norms here in sociology. So rules for behavior. What's appropriate behavior? In our case here, what's appropriate behavior for a teenager, a 17-year-old, in terms of working or not working for pay? What's appropriate for a young male in society? So there's rules around that. Likewise, there's also rules, more formal rules about the age at which, individuals in Alberta can work for pay, and age at which they're not allowed to do that. Other sort of aspects of the social structure are, institutions. Our example here, the institution kind of mostly at work here would be the economy. So the workplaces, the businesses, and everything. And again, what's possible or not possible. Other sort of things, ultimately social facts, practices, values, and beliefs. In our example in Alberta, culture, Central Alberta culture society right now, what are the typical beliefs and appropriateness of a young male working in, say, food industry at this particular time? Or maybe, values or beliefs, sorry, about a young student and a high school student still working and going to school, so this culture is going to have certain ideas whether or not that's appropriate or not in that case. So this is just kind of explaining some of the concepts here, but let's add a little bit more, kind of illustration of what this sociological imagination, how it helps us understand human behavior and experience. So I've added some lines here, and this is sort of, I'll go back one slide here. So as I said, I introduced these when I was talking about the individual biography. Our individual young male here is going to, make decisions, take action in different ways. And so, as I said, he's interested in maybe pursuing, a profession in the food industry, wants to get a part-time job, and so making decisions and actions. It's not a free-for-all, as this, we'll start here, back to this here. It's not a free-for-all in terms of he can't just make good on all of his particular decisions, and that is because of the social structure that exists, and that social structure is, and this is what's reflected by these outside arrows, the social structures is going to create some possibilities, but also some roadblocks and some other things. So let's look at that more specifically. So the social structure makes things possible. And so in this particular case, this individual will likely be able to go and get a job. And because in Alberta, I believe the age at which teenagers are allowed to work for pay is, I believe it's 14 years of age. It might not be in any workplace, but 14 years of age. So our 17-year-old male here definitely is able to, qualifies and follows those particular rules. And given the industry he wants to go into, it's probably a job that there are openings. And probably many, food service places need, and they're hiring and maybe need more people. So the economy as an institution is good. and beliefs within, our culture today, particularly Alberta culture, is very individualized. If you work hard, you might as well, and support yourself, and so beliefs, would be, he wouldn't come up against any constricting uh, beliefs in that particular case. So in all likelihood, can probably find a good job and do well at it. At the same time, however, there might be some other aspects of both his biography and or the elements of the social structure that might create some barriers to his decision to get a part-time job, and or make that not the kind of experience that he's looking for. And so for one, and I purposely chose a picture here of it's just a generic young man here, but I purposely chose a picture here of a young male that looks to be of Asian descent. And so that aspect of his biography might mean that, given maybe some beliefs, or social facts within the workplace, might mean that he might not get hired if he applies to work in a certain place or restaurant there. The owner or other workers might have, some racist, prejudice against anyone who's not of their same race or ethnicity. And even if, say, they did get hired, he did get hired, uh, that sort of, racial inequality might manifest itself in poor treatment that he might face on the job. Another aspect of the social structure, and this would be, I guess, a bit of the institution and a bit of the rules, part of the social structure that might impact on our young man's, sort of attempt to get a part-time job to, let's say, to start to save up money so he can go and enroll in, let's say, the Cook's Apprentice program at Red Deer Polytechnic in a couple years' time. They're young individuals, teenagers, working part-time jobs. There are actually formal rules in place set by the government, and then also they are supported by decisions by specific employers, that employers can pay teenagers less money than an adult worker in the same place doing the same job. So young people don't have the same rights to the minimum wage in the workplace currently in Alberta, in some workplaces as well. So again, say our man, our young man here gets, hired and is working. He wants to save up a lot of money here, but it's going to take him longer, and he's going to have a different experience than, say, an adult worker in the same situation, because of, a rule and institutionalized pattern that has been is established in the space, the culture, the society, and the history, the time period. Not going to go too much into the kind of the history component, but this, this sort of scenario and how it ends up for one individual, would be very different, compared to, oh gosh, 26 years ago. So in the year 2020, it, would have, different forces, different, sort of aspects of the social structure would have had a different aspect on that. Same thing 50 years ago, 100 years ago. At one point, legislation existed that prohibited any teenager from working for pay, and as well as particularly ideas and beliefs that if you're a student and you're going through high school, you should not be working. You have to focus on being a student and getting through high school, then you can work for pay. So as time goes on, the social structure changes and shifts, which then impacts on individuals in different ways throughout time. Okay, I think that is all I want to tell you in our introduction to what sociology is. we are going to start to, with the next topics and the next videos, get a little bit more detail on a lot of these things that I've just touched on here and what the readings touch on here. I'm going to introduce here as well the journal post question. Oh, I'm so sorry. I copied over my PowerPoint slides, and darn it, I'm covering up this. So give me just a quick second here to figure this out. Okay, so you are going to, most weeks for most topics, you are going to be doing a journal, actually two journal posts. Or think of them as a reflection journal. And I've chosen questions, hopefully, that are interesting, but they are hopefully going to allow you to kind of personalize some of the information in the course. And this, in some cases, will help you with the tests and the multiple choice questions there. But in other cases, it actually allows you to go a little bit deeper into engaging with some of the ideas in the course through these journal posts here. So for this topic, for the week, topic 1 journal post, and journal 1, these questions are due, and apologies, I should have had that on the screen, are due by March 2nd in Brightspace there. So you have 2 questions you're being asked to answer. The first question, and I'm going to read out what's hidden here. So the first question is asking you to identify a current issue or event that you would like to explore you could potentially explore using insights from sociology. So anything that's happening out there that you think, you want to try and tie sociology, use some concepts and ideas from sociology to try and understand a bit better. So what current issue or event would you like to explore using insights from sociology? Why might it be useful to look at that issue or event through the lens of sociology? And so what I'll encourage you to do is, particularly with these first set of videos here, is given what myself through the lecture videos and the reading have told you about kind of the things that sociology could potentially explore and how it looks at things, what would you find interesting to sort of, look at? I'll also I'll tell you, you're going to see a variation. You're just going to expand on this issue or this event that you pick here first in the next, in journal 2 and 3 and 4 throughout the course here. So you're going to keep coming back to this, and it's going to be practice at pulling some information to try and actually do start to explore it just a little bit here. So in your response, you're going to use at least one key concept or quote from either the online text or the lecture video in your response. So I'll remind you here as well, you can be using any of the key terms that I've listed for you on the read page in Brightspace there. So that's the first question, and one question that you're doing, and question 2 is going to be using your sociological imagination that we're starting to introduce you to. How is the choice of the clothing that you are wearing at the moment that you're starting to write this post here? How has the choice of your clothing today been influenced by larger social forces? So just a hint for that. As I said here, use a definition of sociological imagination to give you ideas on what larger social forces you might write about in trying to, appreciate the social aspect of your individual choice to pick out clothes to wear today. And so I'll go back to, if you remember, where did it go? Oh, come on. There we go. So we'll go back to, remember this, sort of example. What I'm actually really getting you to do is kind of replace the example I chose here of our young teenager wanting to get a part-time job, replace that with your individual choice to pick out clothes. So I want you to sort of consider, aspects of the social structure that might have impacted on and been a part of guiding and shaping your decisions for that, your clothing choices that day. So what norms or rules or institutions or beliefs that might exist. So in your response there, I'm asking you to use at least two of the concepts discussed previously in this video to explain the larger social forces or patterns impacting on your clothing choice. All right. As always, if you have any questions or need these questions sort of clarified or reworded a different way, reach out to me, send me an email or a message in Brightspace or post to the discussion board in Brightspace, and I'll help you as best I can to make sure you're comfortable and clear on what I want you to do for these journal posts. All right.